Hi, my name is Jenny Devonshire, and welcome to the Pause to Perform podcast, where we talk about all things relating to wellness. What you should take a pause for in your day to optimise your mental and physical health and perform at your peak. Welcome to the Pause to Perform podcast with me, Jenny Devonshire. And this week, I am very excited to be joined by Charlotte Stebbing-Mills. Charlotte is a stress relief and wellness expert, author, speaker, master coach, and co-founder of The Wellness Theory, which is an award-winning wellness platform based in the UAE, specialising in stress relief. So welcome to the podcast, Charlotte.
Thanks for having me, Jenny. I'm really excited to be here. And I just want to say as well, I'm not sure if I've actually said this to you kind of like off, like pre-recording, is I really love like your concept, like the pause to perform. I think anyone that's listening that's probably made similar mistakes to perhaps what we have when it comes to performance realizes that if we don't pause, our performance suffers and chaos starts to take over. So I just absolutely love it. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yes, I think I'm just like, just go, and then it's like, it's one thing that I really struggle with is downtime, like relaxing. Basically, it's I find it. My friend's really funny. I had a friend staying with me, and we were like just watching TV, and then she was like, "Do you ever watch a whole episode of anything?" Because I'm up and down all the time. I can't sit still, so it's like, oh, I'm just going to do that. So I'm always like, all over the place. It's like you're meant to be relaxing, so I find that really difficult. But I think that's probably something that we can talk about a lot when we're talking about what you do. So I thought we could kick off. You could tell the listeners like a little bit about yourself. You have got like an amazing backstory, so I'm sure they'll be really intrigued to hear that. And also what you do over at The Wellness Theory.
Okay, cool. So in terms of backstory, I will share with you kind of just a bit more about me, and then you can pick at the bits that you feel like is relevant and what it is you've previously heard that's most beneficial to your audience. So basically, at Wellness Theory, we're on a mission to help people realise when they're healthy and well, they can be a force for good in the world. We believe that you can't do that if you're stressed out to your eyeballs and burnt out. But that's not really where it all began when it comes to Wellness Theory. My story started me on this path when I was about 13 years old. And I remember being at kind of a local park. You know, in the UK, you have these like cancer research runs. There was this 5K happening. And it was the first time I kind of seen anything like that. Remember it super clearly. There was all these people and they was all like really excited. I'm like, what is going on here? And they were all essentially like being healthy, all running and stuff. But yeah, there was this like real interesting vibe of emotion because there was a lot of people there that were like running for people that they'd lost. There was this like grief, but then there was this love and this like energy, and it was really powerful. And at that time, about 13, I was going through a really turbulent time, like at home, and it was something that just really took me, like witnessing that. I was like, whoa, and it made me realize that I had some options. I was like, okay, I can either choose and live my life in the way in which I'd witnessed certain things growing up, or there was this whole other thing that was suddenly new to me, which was these people that are being healthy and they're doing this stuff, and actually they're turning this struggle and they're turning this pain into something really good, like losing somebody and the horror of that. And I just lost my nan at the time as well, actually. And that, like, so those feelings are very raw, but to see that channeled into something really good just really lit something up inside of me. Being 13, I then quickly didn't really realize what I'd experienced in many ways. Looking back in hindsight, I can see that was what was going on within me. So at 13, I just kind of went on with being 13. But it comes to the point of like picking, what do you want to do? What do you want to do with your life, with your career? And you have to make all those decisions. And I was very much drawn to like personal training and helping people. There was this ripple effect vibe going on that I'd kind of sensed early on, witnessing that kind of run. And then that sent me on this journey of helping people be healthier and be happier, essentially. And it was great, right? So I was personal training, I'd specialized in cardiac rehab. So I was actually already helping people that were very much stressed out and ended up to the point of like having heart attacks, and their lifestyle was, usually a result of high stress and things like that. so this was something that was very, very like apparent throughout my career. And I started to realize my ripple effect could be bigger. So I sort of started to think, okay, well, if I now manage personal trainers, I can help them to have a ripple effect with all their clients. So I kind of ended up like climbing that ladder, as it were, within that kind of fitness and wellness space, working in kind of commercial fitness, ended up leading big teams over here in the Middle East, moved to the UAE in 2013. And yeah, just work myself up that kind of leadership pathway. But in the process, I managed to burn myself out at least 3 times. And that was, again, a big eye opener because, as I'm sure you're aware, Jenny, with your background, you know, the fitness space is very much around, you know, exercise and nutrition and tiny bit of mindset. It's more like just do it. Like if you're not motivated, then you need a trainer. And that was kind of the extent of where things got. And I was like, there's got to be another way. And experiencing my own levels of burnout, it just made me wake up to this point of there's more than just eating well and moving, right? There's something that's being neglected. And for me, that was the first point in which I burnt out. I was probably promoted without the emotional maturity that I really needed. So I looked outwardly to impress and to do my best and, like, you know, really do a good job. And it was great because I did. But then the consequence of that was I got promoted again, which was also really great. But inside I was really struggling, right? I was striving. I was trying to accomplish so many different things outside of me. And it just got to the point where something was off. I didn't really know what it was. I didn't have that level of awareness to know what that was at the time, but it was my emotional well-being. It was all this history, that turbulent upbringing that I mentioned earlier, like all of that just suddenly slapped me in the face, basically. And that really, really took its toll. I was eating emotionally in front of everybody else, life is wonderful, sunshine and rainbows. Behind closed doors, it was dark, it was heavy, it was the first time I burnt out. It was the ultimate rock bottom, to the point of suicidal ideation, really feeling like that was it. And, you know, what's the point? If I can achieve all this stuff and I still feel like this, then what am I even doing here, right? And it just took me in this spiral of despair, really. And it was something that I would never wish upon anyone. And it was something that took me a long time to kind of pull back from, seeking the help and support I needed. But at the same time, that unleashed that fire that ignited back when I was 13, and like this fire of, okay, well, how can I channel this, everything I've experienced, to be a force for good and to help ensure that other people don't have to experience such lows in their life. And that's really what led to the wellness theory being born, where we now obviously help people get to the root cause of any unhealthy stress and burnout by looking at what's going on under the surface of their day-to-day life. And that includes mental, emotional, physical and spiritual well-being.
So that's an amazing story. And I do feel like quite a lot of people come to sort of their purpose or what they're meant to do, anything they're passionate about, from their own struggles, don't they? It's like you experienced it, so you want to help others going through it to not feel as bad as you did, or just to get them from somewhere better than where they are right now. And so with your sort of burnout, because obviously there is a difference between stress and burnout, what are the differences between stress and burnout, and so how can they differentiate whether it's one or the other?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. And it's something that the word like burnout get used so flippantly as well. So I'm so happy that you asked that question. So basically, you know, there's stresses like on a spectrum, isn't it? It's like we can have our day-to-day stresses, but then they can pass pretty quick. And that's something we would call like an acute stress, right? Maybe the boss says something, or you've got a deadline, or you've got certain things that you need to get on with, or your kids are driving you nuts, but they're little stressors that just pass easily. That's like the acute stressors that just keep us on our toes. Often they're not particularly unhealthy because they trigger us to do something differently. We learn, we grow, and that's a healthy stress because we're supposed to have some healthy stress. But then the problem comes is when we let all of those acute stresses add up, and that becomes chronic stress. And when stress becomes chronic, we start to experience the unhealthy side of stress, like the darker side. And that's when we start to perhaps ruminate and overthink, perhaps we overanalyze things, perhaps we have emotional outbursts, perhaps we start to feel physically drained and tired all the time. You know, for some people, they'll experience like irritable gut syndrome, they'll experience obviously like anxiety attacks or panic attacks and things like this. And those are usually some of the signs of like chronic stress, when we start to notice it having a big impact on our lives. But burnout is when chronic stress is left unchecked, right? And we end up burning out, we're exhausted, we get to our version of rock bottom, no matter what that is. That's different for everybody. Typically, I know a lot of the official definitions, they link burnout specifically to work, and you know, it's like a work-related definition. But in all honesty, in my personal experience and professionally working with people, it's often way deeper than that. It's often that there's something going on, kind of what we call our root level of our human experience, that's really like rocking the boat and really creating some disruption. And it's when we get to the point of pure exhaustion and we know something's got to change, because we literally cannot go on like this anymore, because you don't have the energy to show up. You can't put that brave face on for people anymore. Your fuse is just so friggin' short. Like, you just can't have the relationships that you want in your life, you know. That's at the point where we're talking about burnout. And that's really what I would say probably the main differences are.
Yeah. And also there's like also good stress in the short term, like eustress, because I remember when I was doing my dissertation for my MSc like last year, and I could focus for like 8 hours, which I can never normally do because you've got that adrenaline and things, and it can be so useful in the short term. But like, again, like, yeah, so if it goes unchecked, then it's obviously becomes detrimental, but it can also be very useful. And I think sometimes stress gets like a really bad rep, but it has got, it's there for a reason. But as long as we can like just manage like the time frame. And there was a couple of things, like when you're talking about when you sort of had your burnout, when you're working, you were striving, like you were obviously were you enjoying the job at the time? Did you enjoy the work?
Absolutely loved it. Really enjoyed the work. And that was the thing that I couldn't reconcile in my mind. It was like, I just don't understand what is going on, and that was creating more frustration. But the more I enjoyed what I was doing, at least I was feeling something, right? I was on this pendulum of really loving what I was doing, but then on the other flip side of it, behind closed doors, I was on the other end and it was complete darkness. There was no middle ground, and I couldn't figure out what the issue was. And yeah, it's a weird one, right? And I think only people that maybe have experienced it can really relate. But when you really love something, like you want more of it. And I was in that, like you would use the word striving there, which sums it up perfectly. But I think I was striving, but I was also trying to cope. And I was using that love for what I was doing to cope with the other end of the pendulum. And that was creating a problem in itself, right? And we all create these coping mechanisms, which often don't help, especially when we don't know what it is we're really coping with, because it's still unconscious at the time. So yeah, I think it's a tricky path to walk, but yeah, I would say I was loving what I was doing.
Yeah, well, I was on a webinar yesterday, and they were talking about like meaningful work, and they were talking about you know, people who love their jobs, and they actually did a study with zookeepers. But the problem was, because people loved what they were doing, it's quite easy for them to get exploited, because they are willing to put those extra hours in. Obviously the animals are really relying on them, and so the employers are kind of like realize, oh well, they'll work for free, they'll work extra hours. But so even if it's something that you absolutely love, you still need to like check that you're looking after yourself, because like our body can only do so much. And I think we've kind of talked about it before, but like the yin and yang, like I'm very yang and I think you probably are as well. And you know, you want to, like, I hate feeling tired. I've got a real, like, I think it becomes because when I was younger, I had really bad insomnia for years. So I was exhausted, like, you know, it'd be like sort of 3-4 in the morning, couldn't sleep because I had really bad anxiety. And so I would always had this fear of like, how am I going to cope with my day? I'm going to be tired. What if I'm tired? So now I've still got that with me, of this fear of being tired. Whereas if I didn't have that, then I could just relax when I was tired. But rather than do that, I'm like, all right, have another coffee, or, you know, push through, because I just don't want to have that feeling. And again, it comes back to that thing of like, you've got unresolved like things that you haven't dealt with that continue to impact on your behaviors later on. And until you go back to that, the root cause of it, you're not actually going to sort of change anything. And so what did like your kind of recovery or your journey into this sort of more whole self come about?
First of all, I just want to recognize what you just said there, because like I can relate to it like through and through, and it's that's the kind of unchecked stuff that we have to keep an eye on, because I'm exactly the same as you in that sense. You know, it's like I want everything done, I want it done yesterday, and I don't have time for tiredness, I don't have time for any of that stuff. And it's like it's so necessary. Our time off becomes more powerful than our time on, and I think that's something really hard for us to get our heads around when we're in that kind of achiever mode, right? And when we want to perform at our best and we want to do well, and we've got a mission, and those things are so powerful, but they can become like our kryptonite when you know, it starts to block our progress. So yeah, I hear you on that massively.
And also like the guilt, I always have the guilt if I'm not doing things. So it's like, rather than like, I remember especially when I had like sort of when I was at uni again, it's because it's always there, that even when I wasn't doing anything, I wasn't really relaxing, because I was like, I should be doing, and it's like the should word, that is like the worst one, isn't it? And it's like, I should be doing something, I should be reading something. And it's like, well, that then makes the time that you're not doing anything like null and void, because you're not actually relaxed. So you might as well take a proper break.
Exactly. And that's where it comes to what we said earlier about like getting to the root cause of it. Like, what is it that is causing us to experience life that way? You know, like what is the, where did that come from? Like, 'cause that's not just necessarily our nature to respond that way in those situations. It's very natural, but it's not necessarily our only option. And to go back to the question you asked, like, what did my journey to recovery look like? And it looked at that. It looked at asking, okay, where is all this coming from? Like, if I was to know, what would that be? And at the time, I'm like drawing blanks. I'm like, I don't know, I'm just emotional and I don't know why. Like, I've experienced this cocktail of emotions. And it's just like, it took somebody to actually, first of all, explain to me what's going on, right? What am I experiencing? Where are these emotions coming from? Like, what's happening in my mind for me to be having these thoughts? And I remember it was a therapist that I saw, literally the morning after I had a really horrendous night, to the point of being like this close to really just ending it all. And I sent him an email at something like 3 o'clock in the morning and was like, I need help. Like, and like, I didn't have the confidence to literally phone her up at that point. I was ashamed as well. And I was so confused. But anyway, I ended up seeing this wonderful lady. And she said to me, she just said something. She was like, your thoughts, she said, are just thoughts. That's all they are. They're not real, right? So when I'm thinking that what am I doing here? And I'm not seeing myself in the light that I could, I suddenly realized actually the first thought isn't, you know, optional, right? The second one is, but the first thought is just something that's coming and going. It's just a little signal that I can pay attention to and explore it if I want to. And creating that distance, I think, between the voice in my head and the way I was responding to it really made a difference. But the first point of call was understanding what was going on within me. I'd never studied the mind, not really. I'd studied motivation from a fitness standpoint, but that's, to be honest, like, honestly completely pointless if you don't understand the rest of it. So as much as I love all these like videos you see of just push through and do this and wake up at 5 and run 100k and do these ultra things, like, it can be really detrimental if we don't understand what's going on underneath it. And for me, that was the case. So understanding what was going on in my mind, understanding how I was functioning, and then that allowed me to feel safe within myself to then start to explore, okay, where's it stemming from? And that was only when I started to link, oh, hang on, there's lots of unresolved emotions over here from when I was a kid. Perhaps I should actually look at that and learn to let them go and start to understand how am I experiencing emotion in my body, because I was only experiencing the extremes. I couldn't have told you how I was feeling. If somebody said to me at work back then and they said to me, how are you? I'd be like, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm okay. Because I genuinely thought that I was at that moment in time. I didn't have the words to articulate the hell that I was experiencing behind closed doors. In my mind, I was okay in that moment when they asked the question. It's like, but I almost needed somebody to ask me that question when I was on my own experiencing what I was experiencing. But obviously nobody knows that until you tell them. So there was this whole like battle of being vulnerable and being able to ask for help and all of that at the same time. So I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question, to be honest, at this point, but it was just this big like cocktail of things. But the first thing was definitely the understanding, opening up, and then having the confidence and safety to be able to then explore what was actually triggering it all. And then I got to work on that, and that's work, to be honest, that still I have to do today, you know. And I think that's another myth that's out there, is that when we start to visit some of our past stuff, is that it can just be resolved in like one session with a therapist, or watch this social media reel and then you'll see these tips and then life's wonderful. And I think it's really important to understand that sometimes, you know, really learning our own patterns can start to really inform how we can perform better and be better and use that stuff for good. And that's really, I think, the biggest learning curve that still shows up today.
Yeah, I think like it's so easy to be disconnected from your emotion, because I'm exactly the same. I'm very much in my head, and my friend does kind of embodiment, and she's like, you know, a lot of stuff is stored in your body. And so I'm exactly like you. If someone said like, how are you feeling? You're like, oh, I don't actually know, like nothing. And it's because you've just like got so used to just not feeling things. And I remember doing a course, and it was all about, you know, does it, trying to get like, you know, the exercises, like, you know, trying to picture something, see how you're feeling, checking in, and like, does it have a shape and all that kind of thing. And I just like, no, there's nothing there. And I found for me, like, I think yoga's been really useful. And it was like, I did yoga for years, but I only ever went to classes. And then when I went to Greece for 6 months to work, and I was doing like my own practice for the first time. So I just put on music and just moved like however my body kind of wanted me to move. And I remember out of nowhere, I'd just start crying. I'd just be on my mat, just didn't even know what it was about. I was just crying, like getting it out. And then it would be, I'd go to get it out, and then I'd be completely fine again. And it was just like, just allowing that to happen, because, you know, it's, you don't necessarily initially have to talk about, you know, you can, I think that's, talking therapy I think is great, but for me, because I was like so sort of shut down, you know, I just couldn't, it was almost like I couldn't access anything because it was too scary. But doing a body, like, you know, body practice was much better. And so it's like, yeah, there's lots of different ways that we can kind of tap into these things, aren't there?
100%. And I can, again, I can really relate to your journey. It's so weird that we're having this conversation like this, because it's so in parallel, I think. And yeah, there's so many different entry points to stress, but also to, you know, chronic stress and the heavier perhaps root cause stuff that we're talking about. But you don't have to start there. Most people don't want to start there. They have no intention of starting there. And often most people are unaware they even need to work on some of that stuff. So one of the things that we talk about and we do a wellness theory, part of our methodology, is that we meet our clients where they are, right? And we do that through looking at through the lens of what we call our stress awareness pyramid, where we have kind of our life at the top of the pyramid. We have our health and our body essentially in the center, and then we have on the baseline of that the root stuff, the things that we've been talking about. And most of the time clients will come to us because something's happening at the life level, right? Something's happening there, something's happening in their relationship, maybe something is happening in their work, there's something situational often happening, or they've noticed a pattern in their thinking or their emotions or in their habits, and they can't stick to being active, or they are eating emotionally and things like that. So we start to look at those health things. So it takes a while often to really get into that root level work with somebody, and it's not always completely necessary. I think it's always important to have an understanding of, you know, what's made us who we are today. But you don't always have to dig in and explore and go deep on everything. But what we have to do is start to see where we are today and go straight away for that easy win. And for you, if it was embodiment, it's like that moving your body, that was your entry point, which is fantastic. And hopefully you know, that is almost like a go-to activity for you when you find yourself in those moments of, I haven't got time for tiredness, I need to get on with this thing, right? Or I'm thinking about not being able to sleep because of that thing that I've got going on, or whatever. You know, hopefully that's the moment in which we come back to our breath, come back to our body. And I say that obviously you've just shared kind of your experience there, but for me also, like the laying in bed and having thoughts before I get off to sleep, you know, that's something that still will happen from time to time, and I need to come back to my body. I have to come back to my breath. I have to just be like, okay, no, where am I? I'm here, I'm in my body, like I can feel my heartbeat, and I just follow my breath, and it just brings me back. And immediately when I can do that, it just starts to relax the body. So like you, it's like living almost in this state of tension sometimes when we get so passionate, excited about what we're doing, which is a great thing. But if not, we can get stuck in that state, and that's when it starts to cause the problems.
Yeah, and I think you like the difference is people might want to like never feel like that, but that's kind of like an unrealistic goal. The difference is that you have the tools to then like to catch yourself, and then also to help bring you back, because you kind of know what to do in those situations. And I just thought I'd come back to kind of like what you do. So you're in the UAE, right? And I've seen a few of your like LinkedIn posts talking about sort of the prevalence of stress in the UAE, because they work really long hours, and is that, I think I got from your post? Or?
So probably that one. So there was some data that came out recently that said that the UAE was in the top 3 hardest working countries globally. Again, like data, I think, can obviously show what the person taking the data wants to show sometimes, but I do think there's you know, a crossover, and it's being mirrored everywhere in the world, I think, in many ways. But UAE, yes, it's very prevalent at the moment. You know, there was some Cigna research that came out at the start of this year that showed 98% of people are experiencing at least one symptom of burnout. And I believe that is being mirrored across the UK and Europe as well. And it's something that just doesn't sit well with me. Like that's awful for me to think. Like it breaks my heart to think there are that many people that are struggling and don't have the tools. So we also collect information really around like the people that we work with, and one of the things that we did is we interviewed just over 200 people, and 56% of them said that the one reason, the top reason that they didn't get the results they wanted was because they was unsure what to do. They didn't know how to overcome their stress because they didn't know what to do. So it wasn't time, it wasn't money. Yes, those things can play a part, but it was actually not being sure what to do, where to start. And so that's really like why we do what we do, is to help people get started on the journey, meeting them where they are, having that education piece in there so people can understand what they're experiencing, and that it is okay and it is normal. Heck, you're the same with 98% of people right now in the UAE. So, you know, you're not alone in it, even though we can feel alone in it. So it's really shining a spotlight onto that, and giving people the resources they need to be able to move forward.
And are there like any particular professions that are more prone to it, or do you think it is across the board?
There are definitely, like tech industry is a big one. People working in health, ironically, is a big one as well. Entrepreneurs is a big one that we're seeing come through now as well. Yeah, there's lots, but I think, to be honest, sometimes we're quick to label these things, and we forget to look at the individual. And I think there's individuals in every industry that need help and need support.
So yeah, you work with sort of individuals and corporations. And I feel, you know, stress and burnout is being talked about an awful lot more than it used to be. Do you think organizations are really making changes and doing everything they can, or like what do you recommend that they can do to sort of do more?
Oh, that's a great question. So, yes, I think the pandemic shone a big spotlight onto the way corporates are supporting their employees. And I think there's been this big back and forth as to, well, whose responsibility is it? You know, it's up to the individual to look after themselves, and the corporate is starting to realize they've got to tick certain boxes, but then that's also part of the problem because they're just ticking boxes. So I see it as that it's a shared responsibility, right? Everybody has to do their part. Often, though, we can't be what we can't see, right? And that becomes one of the biggest problems, because unfortunately, it's not common to see health in home environments unless you happen to be in a relationship or in a certain dynamic that values that. So if we're not seeing it at home or with our immediate relationships, the only other place we're really going to see it is in the workplace, right, where we spend like a big bulk of our time. So we have to have a sense of leadership, right, within the corporate. They have to lead by example. That doesn't mean everybody's got to be an elite athlete. It literally just means that we have to care. We have to care enough to look at what's actually going on, you know, in the corporate space, you know, but not just from a kind of workshop standpoint. And this is the interesting thing. For years at Wellness Theory, we would work in solely with individuals, and we would get asked to do kind of corporate gigs and do a workshop around stress management, deliver a training on emotional regulation and things like that. And we've been doing that for a long time. But it took us to really take a step back and look at the problem, to be like, what is the missing piece? Am I actually being part of the problem, or am I being part of the solution? And what I actually really determined, and my ego hated the fact that it was true, but we were being part of the problem. We were going into organizations, we were putting a band-aid on situations that they're experiencing. They was having a great workshop or experience a really nice meditation and all these different things, but they were walking away and they were still stressed out as soon as they got back to their desk, right? And that was it until the next workshop. Right. For some people, obviously, they would adopt these little things and put them into their life, which is great. And we're super happy with the ripple effect that has. And some people, obviously, then move and do some deeper work, and that's fantastic. But we couldn't help but think there's a missing piece of the puzzle here. And that is the big picture look at what is happening in corporate wellness. So one, it has to be obviously a shared responsibility. And part of the corporate's responsibility isn't to just send people to a workshop and then put the responsibility back on them to just adopt everything magically, because apparently we're really good at starting habits. Like, that's just not true at all, is it? If we look at society, like, we're the world's worst that's saying we're going to complete something we say we're going to do. So anyway, there's this kind of like conflict there that wasn't getting a result. So essentially what we do now when we work with corporates is we look at two things. We look at the level of ongoing corporate hygiene that they actually have going on. We're looking at psychological safety. We're looking at what kind of crisis support they have. We're looking at, do they have initiatives for vulnerable groups, like people who might be grieving, or women going through menopause, or single parents, or people who have moved from their home country and are living alone and have got no social connection and sense of belonging. So there's some example of the vulnerable groups. Obviously, we're looking at compassionate leadership, we're looking at diversity and inclusion strategies and all these different kinds of things. And that's kind of just like one piece of the puzzle, but that's the stuff the corporate really needs to be living and breathing everyday life, right? They're the things that must be staple. They're like the absolute baseline that should be happening over and over and over again. So it's a constant support system. And then we can look at that wellness level, right? So we've got corporate hygiene and we've got wellness, where we're looking at, okay, what are the biggest issues within your workplace? What's your mission as a company? And how do we link that to the campaigns that you're running? And more often than not, we were finding that, you know, we get a phone call on like a Wednesday saying, can you come and deliver a workshop on Monday? And it's like, hang on a minute, like, where's this fitting into some bigger picture thinking here? Like, what is your actual goal here? What are you trying to help your employees to do? What are you trying to set out? So we start to actually ask that question, and we start to bring together, what is that big message that you want for your teams to adopt, but also for the culture that you want to adopt as well. And then what we do is we help them through some assessments and speaking to employees at different varying levels as well. We help them to map out, what does a campaign actually look like in their company? Because it might be that actually 30% of people in your company need some real good mental health support. It might be that another 40% of those need financial support, financial wellness advice and training and understandings. And it might be that there's the physical health, right? Or confidence at work for the remaining. So we have to look at that data and actually start to use it wisely, and then look at, okay, well, what are the campaigns? So for example, in that kind of situation, if you've got a demographic of employees that all need slightly different things, you just start to, throughout the year, you run a confidence at work campaign that runs for a good few months and is solid, and there's a lot there to support them. You work on mental wellness and mental fitness, you work on financial well-being for then the next quarter, and you start to build out this really well thought out strategy. and then we help to support them in engaging them, and we've got a variety of different ways that we do that. But first, that piece has to happen, otherwise we won't work with that corporate. And that's also another thing that our ego doesn't like, right? Because it's like, if people want us to do a workshop, it's like, cool, we'll do a workshop, provided it's essentially a one-off workshop, and we open the conversation about your bigger strategy. Otherwise, we refuse point blank now to go into companies that just want this band-aid solution. But ultimately, what we're seeing in the marketplace is that, you know, this is what people want, it's what they need. Most of the time, people that are tasked with delivering these kind of campaigns and initiatives within a company are the ones that are burnt out. They don't have the expertise, they don't know where to look, they don't know what questions to ask. And that's where we then work with organizations to address those things. But underneath all of that, the corporate hygiene piece is absolutely critical. And that's, I think, the thing that is now being more widely spoken about, which is great, but now we have to see the action to go with it.
Yeah, I've obviously done like the similar research and sort of come to those same conclusions. And it's like, you know, I'd go in before like teaching like a weekly yoga class or a HIIT class or what have you, but it's all very well if people like it and take it up, but a lot of people don't, and that's not what they need. And the same thing with you know, doing workshops, because you do a resilience workshop, you give them all these tools, and then they just go, oh, that's great, go away, and then never use them again. And also it could even put more pressure on them, because it's like, right, so I've done this workshop, but I still feel terrible, I failed at it, kind of thing. And I think, you know, also coming back to sort of like the leadership, it's even small things like taking a lunch break and not sending emails at ridiculous times, because if they're doing it, then all the employees feel like they have to. So it definitely has to be that kind of leading by example, and yeah, not just this yeah, like you say, a plaster which doesn't help anyone in the long run. So I hope that businesses and companies will be more open to this, you know, really getting to the root cause of the solution, because it will benefit everyone, the company, the employees. I mean, there's no quick fix for these things.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And there's no one size fits all either, right? Which is why the forward-thinking companies and the forward-thinking leaders will be paying attention to this. You know, there's a lot of pressure, particularly here in the UAE, with regards to taking care of health and happiness within the workplace. You know, there's a lot of government initiatives, which is fantastic, but we just need to make sure that we're addressing it at the depth and at the root of what is needed, rather than just the shiny, fun looking stuff. You know, we've got to make sure that actually we do have a support system for people in your business that have been through mental health first aid. This is a common thing that we're seeing. It's like they're ticking the box, like, great, we've got this many mental health first aiders, right? And it's like, okay, well, who's supporting your mental health first aiders, and who's actually engaging them and activating and checking in on them to make sure they have the continued resources to be able to support fellow workers, you know? And often that's a big thing that we're seeing that's missing. So we have to start to take more responsibility as individuals and as corporates. And like you said, there can sometimes be a lot of shame attached to what we can and can't do as individuals, and that's where that support mechanism is an absolute must. And everything's a co-creation. You know, nothing exists on its own. We have to support each other. And I think something that we're probably both actually seeing, so I know we're doing a lot of the same research and stuff, is that there's almost a bit of finger pointing going on. It's like, we need to do this, you need to do that. And it's like, okay, what if we all just took some responsibility here and said, you know what, I can do this, I can do that, this is what I'm passionate about, and you've got this skill set, you've got that skill set, let's bring it all together and actually be a force for good, right?
What does be a force for good mean to you?
What a great question. It's using our vitality to be able to improve anything, right? That could be setting up a charity, that could be being the best mom, it could be being the best partner in your relationship, or doing a good deed for a stranger. But having the self-awareness and the energy to be able to actually show up aware and conscious to be able to act on those things. Most of the time we're walking around, and I say we're because this is something that was so prevalent for me, I'm walking around in my own head. It's like, how many times do we walk past strangers and we don't say good morning, we don't smile, we're wrapped up in our own world? And technology plays a part in that now, because we're walking around with headphones, listening to podcasts or music or whatever, and we're off in our own thoughts, and we all need that time. You know, there's nothing wrong with that time, but I think there's a lot of disconnection happening, and there's a lot of loneliness that's happening, and there needs to be some connection. And I think being a force for good really comes back to, how are we connecting in the world in whatever way is important to the individual. So yeah, that's I guess that's what I'd say.
Oh, I love that. It's funny, actually, I was doing some research a while ago about like happiness, and doing something for others actually can improve your own happiness. And I think it was like, the more that people did, I think it was, they had to do it, I think it might have been 3 things, and it was either over 5 days or in a day. And the people that did it on the single day had like more, and they reported greater feelings of happiness. So I mean, so again, so it's, you try, I think that reminds me of that Friends episode, you know, when Phoebe's trying to do something really altruistic, but everything makes her feel good, so she's like that. But yeah, so it helps us both. It helps you, the individual, and it helps whoever you are offering your help to. So I love that. And I'm trying to at the moment, like, not look at my phone when I'm walking around, like just put it away, because you know, you see so many people, and it's just, yeah, you're not taking in even the little things around you. I know I'm guilty of it myself, so I know it's like very easy, but yeah, I think the phones can be a terrible distraction, and I want to get away from mine.
There's I can relate to that as well, you know, and obviously running your own business, as you know as well, is that you almost do have to be on a lot of the time as well, and there's things you're trying to contend to, you're trying to maximize your time. Again, in that achiever, high performer mindset, is that you want to just be go to some extent, but it's become an addiction, right? It definitely has been for me, and it's something, again, I'm consciously trying to stay away from. Like, I won't go on any form of social media now until after midday, and that really helps, because things now don't hijack my thinking. And before, it was like, oh, I've seen this thing, or oh, I've answered this question now, and it's like, I haven't even spent any time with my own thoughts yet, because I've immediately gone to the phone. So little things like that, but having the intention, I think, is really important, right? Because like you said, you know, it's very natural to want to go out and to do something whilst you're walking, or go out and see the beauty that surrounds you, you know, but set the intention before, I think, can be really, really helpful as well. And set your intention as to why you picked up your phone in the first place, because 9 times out of 10, there's something going on at that root level of what we were talking about earlier, that's causing us to just almost like put everything else on the back burner and like forget and just indulge in something that's easy, right? Instant gratification.
Yeah, it's funny. So I went on holiday recently, and I was like, I'm not going to do any work, but I was reading some educational books the whole time, and it got to like near the end of the holiday. I was like, because normally I come back from holiday and I'm so inspired, I can't wait to get back and like do all these things. I was like, this is weird. Why is this not happening? I've been reading, you know, and then I was like, oh, it's because I've been reading like educational books, and even though that they were really interesting, it wasn't just off. So I had one day, I just listened to house music on my sun lounger. I was just like dancing in my chair and just looking out to the sea. And then after that, it's like my brain, I just let my brain go, and it was amazing. And so I'm thinking now, I'm like, right, when I do go on walks, I normally listen to podcasts, but actually I think just allowing my brain just to go off on one, like, it's probably a much better use of that time.
100%. Yeah, definitely. I can really relate to that. It's something that it's again a tricky like line to walk, right? Because there's you're always being like pulled. And actually, I said to you, didn't I? Actually, when you said how are you before we started recording, I'm like, I'm walking the line at the moment. I'm being pulled in so many different directions, and I'm constantly trying to come back to my center. And things like you've just said there are those daily things that help so much. And I think sometimes we can overestimate the power of a decision like that, to listen to our music and dance on our deck chair instead of, you know, picking up a book, even though we're being pulled to do that because we love it and we enjoy it, or we need to. It's having that awareness to be able to pull ourselves back, isn't it, sometimes? And that is the difference between moving into chronic stress or staying kind of with that acute stress as well.
That brings me on to my next question perfectly. Are there any like tips that you can give the listeners of how they can sort of manage stress in the short term, like just like, yeah, like quick wins, things in the moment, just if they're really struggling right now?
Yeah, breath is always the first thing I would go to, because it's the fastest way to get our nervous system back into our window of ability to respond, basically. And so whenever we breathe, then just simply making our exhale slightly longer than our inhale is something super simple that anyone can do. So something like that, just being aware of our breath, can be really useful. It's often, though, one of the worst things and hardest things to do when we've got something stressful happening, or maybe if it's something actually happening in our environment that we have to deal with, or if it's a thought in our, like thoughts in our head that's creating this extra pressure. Usually the last thing we want to do is breathe, but that is the thing to do. That is the thing to do, because from that place we can actually respond rather than react. So anything, the tip really is anything that helps you to respond versus react. So breath is a great one anyone can do, but it could also look like stepping away and going for a walk, looking out the window, just putting your screens down for a minute, reaching out and having a phone call with somebody that you care about, looking at something that makes you laugh, listening to your favorite song, anything that just brings you back to yourself. So we're not swinging on this pendulum of life is amazing and life is terrible. We need to come back to that center point. So anything that allows you to feel grounded, I would say, is probably what the most effective thing. Because again, one size doesn't fit all, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there anything like, because obviously your burnout was sort of in the workplace, what is there any way you can like recommend to individuals like how to set boundaries and manage their kind of work-life balance to sort of mitigate any danger of going into that burnout area?
Great question. Depends on the level of self-awareness of the individual, right? If the only self-awareness we have is that we're stressed out of our mind, then we need to actually investigate. We need to explore a little bit more before we try and put boundaries in and say, right, no phone at this time, or I'm not going to work at that time. We have to look beyond the stress to be like, okay, how do I know I'm stressed? What am I noticing in my body? Like, how am I responding to this stressful situation? And then you can start to look at, is it your energy being depleted? Is it that you've got too much distraction going on? Because then you can actually start to put boundaries in play that are actually going to be helpful. So there's no point me saying to somebody that's got no issue with their phone and they're not addicted to their phone at all or distraction. There's no point me saying to them, okay, don't check your phone until 12 o'clock. It's absolutely meaningless. For them, it might be actually they need to drink more water. They might actually just be dehydrated and their energy levels are low. And that's what's putting them on the verge of burnout. So first, it has to be awareness. I would say for everybody, to be honest, don't set boundaries until you have a form of awareness. It's got to be the first thing. So become aware of what is the problem and how is it showing up, and then look at a suitable boundary that makes sense for you, and then start to implement something. But you have to have that awareness piece first.
Excellent advice. I think that's awareness I think is fundamental to everything, and so many of us, like, it's not something that comes naturally because you got so used to just ignoring the signs and just push through, especially when you kind of want to get loads of things done. I really wanted to ask you about some values, because I know when I came on your podcast, I know values are really important to you, and I would just be like intrigued to know sort of when did you kind of come across values and the importance of living a life in line with your values, and how do you kind of tie that in with your work with maybe individuals and corporations?
Great question. So the first time I think I really understood values, let's say that, because I'm sure there was probably something in my world that was teaching me about values that I was completely oblivious to, but it was when I did one of my first coaching qualifications, and it was when I realized that our values are essentially like 95% of our self-initiated motivation. It comes from values. So it was at that point I started to think, okay, well, why does everybody always look outside of themselves? Why did I look outside of myself for motivation? Like, why was I doing that? Why do I need the music? Why do I need the personal trainer at the gym? Why do I need all these things to motivate me? What I realized is actually I don't. The only motivation I need is within me if I'm living in alignment. And one of the reasons why I think I experienced burnout, not just once, not just twice, 3 times, because, which is mad, right? When you think about what I do, but we've got to be real, and sometimes awareness on its own isn't enough, right? And things can manifest in different ways. But the reason that I burnt out for the second time was because a big misalignment of values, particularly in the work that I was doing. Right. So I felt that, so I burnt out the first time, had all this past stuff essentially come up, slap me in the face, and suddenly started to learn about myself, how I operate, why I do what I do, why I think the way I think, and started to understand who I was. As I started to understand who I was, I started to realize that actually maybe there's certain things in my life that aren't in alignment to me, right? Before it was fine because ignorance was bliss, right, to some extent. But then I started to think, okay, well, why am I not happy about this thing, or this decision that's been made, or the way this is playing out in my life? And it come back to, well, because this is important to me and that's important to them, right? For example, one of the company that I was working for at the time, great intentions, a really great company, loved working there, but our values weren't aligned, in the sense that we actually need to look at the well-being of an individual overall, not just the bits that we want to see them improve on, right? We have to treat people as holistic beings, and that was a big misalignment of values. I couldn't remain in that company authentically, knowing what I knew now, right? So there was a misalignment of values, but it took a while for me to realize that it was values that was creating that turmoil within me. So that was the first time I think I personally experienced values being in conflict. And that was when I started to realize, okay, well then what else do I value? If I'm recognizing that this thing is actually sending me down a path that's frustrating me, right, and I'm not feeling aligned, and things are feeling a bit turbulent, then what's the flip side of that? So I actually went and just started to elicit my own values more deeply and understand what is the role they're playing in my life. And any unhappiness was coming back to disruption within a value not being played out in my life, right? And the only person that's in control of our values is ourselves, right? And it's because it comes down to the decisions we make. If we know what we value, we can make decisions that keep us on a path that we're aligned with, that's authentic to us. So to answer your question, a lot of people get stressed and stay in a state of chronic stress because they're living in misalignment with their values, and often they don't even know what their values are. And that can become a big problem, because then we start to go and work in companies that are misaligned with our values, and then we blame the company, the culture, everyone's out to get us. No, you actually just value different things, and that's okay, right? That's absolutely okay. But it's then your responsibility to then live in alignment to your own values, because when you do, you start to notice like tension, frustration, unhealthy stress starts to fall away. It doesn't mean everything has to be perfect. It just means you have to move towards what you value the most in life. And with regards to kind of corporates, is we look at the values of the company, but we also then bring out what is the values of the individual. So if the company cares about profit and purpose, that's fantastic, right? Great for the company. They've got two really good important things, because with profit, they can continue to live their purpose and do whatever it is they're trying to do, their business objectives. But if you've got somebody in the company who cares about trust, loyalty, fun, right, and profit and purpose don't come into their top values, they might immediately feel like there's no affinity to the missions, the company. They don't feel seen and heard, because they're not necessarily being allowed to play out their values and live fully and live authentically in that workplace, which then disrupts psychological safety, right? So when we have that disconnect and a conflict of values, whether it be internally ourselves or with somebody else in a relationship or in a work setting, we stress, right? And so we need to acknowledge, what do we value and how can we align with each other's values in a way that makes sense. One of the reasons we're on this podcast today is because we share some values in common. We care about getting this message out there. You know, then there's different things we probably value in different areas of life, but there's people that have common values to you. So finding your tribe also comes back to your values, right? And the more people you can align with that value similar things to you, the more connected we feel as human beings as well. But first of all, we have to reconcile our own internal values and get them into alignment so that we can feel connected to ourselves before we can authentically connect to others. Does that answer your question?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great answer. I think the one thing that I found really interesting with like sort of the values exercise is it really highlights how different people see the world, because, you know, we're living, you know, see different things, attend to different things because of like, you know, everything's automatic, our automatic thoughts, and then you've got our values are like can be very different. And I remember like I did my acceptance commitment therapy course, and values is like one of the sort of very main parts of it. And one of mine was, I think it was freedom or autonomy. For me, it's like very, very important. And I just realized why I hated working in a corporate job on a 9 to 5 so much, because it was I was completely out of line with my values. And I think also within that, you know, sometimes having to work late and all those kind of things, it was like, you know, complete lack of control. And yeah, and as soon as I stopped and I went into being a personal trainer, even though I was working way longer hours, it was on my terms. And so that just makes such a difference. And yeah, so I also know sort of firsthand, like that switch of changing like something, so you are sort of living that more life in line with your values can be so important. And I also think like now, I don't know if this is just me from what I've seen, but I feel like companies are kind of being more transparent, or they're putting their values out there a lot more. But the only thing I wonder is, are some of them just saying things that sound good rather than being like really authentic to the company? Like, what have you seen on your side?
Yeah, you've got the extremes, right? Always, you've got the people that live and breathe what they do, and then you've got the companies that are literally just doing it because they need something on the wall, and their branding team have told them that that's what they have to have. So actually, an outsourced marketing agency has come up with their values. They haven't spoken to the founder, the mission of the business, the people in the business to even come up with those values. So we're seeing the extremes, and it's scary because values are work that we do on that root level, right, that we were talking about earlier. That's a really, really deep, powerful thing to really get right. And then when we're seeing that people do start to understand the true values of a business and are allowed to align and share and express their own values and live within personal values in the workplace, we're seeing performance skyrocket. And that's an incredible thing. So the more, what we're literally seeing is that the more authentic people can be, is the better they perform, right? And I think that's a paradigm shift for anybody and everybody involved. So yeah, I'm with you on seeing the extremes of the values in the workplace. I think the biggest opportunity for companies, even if they do have legit, authentic values as a company, is to start understanding, what do your individual employees value? Ask them. Every line manager listening to this, every CEO listening to this, go and ask your employees, what do they value? And I don't mean the surface level values, like I value my family and I value my car and being healthy. Yes, those are things that are important to you, but what about those things is important? What about your family do you value? Is it the love, the connection, the trust? What is it about being healthy that you value? Is it the energy? Is it the confidence? Like, what is it about those things that are so important? And one of the, I guess, blind spots that I have seen in personal development and in the corporate space is that the conversation stops at the surface level when it comes to values. It's, I value family, health, my car, right? And it's like, okay, well, what else? Like that's just like that's the vehicle, that's the stuff that's showing up day to day as a result of you enjoying things about the thing. It's always the thing about the thing, right? And that's the opportunities that individuals and organizations have right now, is to really tap into that. And that's something that doesn't cost you anything to do. Anyone can do it right now. Simply sit down and ask yourself, what is important to you about work? What else? What else? What else? What else? What else? And keep on going until you run out. What's important to you about your health? What else? What else? What else? What else? Just keep on going, because you'll have a piece of paper that's filled with so many different things that are important to you in different contexts of your life. So that if you're in a place where you need to make a decision, you can go back to your values and literally look at it and be like, is this aligned with my values? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? Right? One of the biggest stresses that happens with individuals is in and around decision making. The amount of clients we've worked with that come to us because they feel like decision making is the thing that's stopping them from overcoming their stress is incredible. Not something that I would have originally thought of, but it's something that it's becoming clearer and clearer. So again, the role of values is so important. We start to create our own little book of rules as to, okay, this is part of who I am. This is what is important to me. And as soon as we start to own that, we become more vital, we become more healthy, we become stronger, more confident. And that's where we can leverage that in so many wonderful ways. And I think that's the opportunity for individuals and organizations.
Okay. And the question, what else, is so powerful, because if when someone keeps asking you that out externally, and then you're like nothing, but they're like, no, what else? And then you really find some amazing information that you just didn't it takes a while and it is difficult, but you uncover something very, very important by doing so. So thank you for sharing that, and I hope everyone listening goes away and works out what their values are after that. And I thought I'd just ask you the last question. Don't want to take up too much more of your time, but you probably already touched on it, but I ask everyone, so I will ask you. What is one thing you recommend individuals or companies take a pause for in their day to improve their mental and physical health and optimize their performance?
Yeah, zooming out has got to be the thing. It's zooming out to be able to get perspective, right? It doesn't matter whether you're an individual or an organization. If we're not zooming out and looking at the big picture of our life and who we are and what we're doing here, right, in this crazy world that's just spinning around the universe, get some perspective, because that needs to be informing how you show up. The level of conversation you have, the energy behind the conversations you have, the decisions you make, it all comes from perspective. Often what we notice when people are super stressed out is that they're very close to the thing, right? And because we end up being in that survival mode to a sense, right? We become laser focused on a thing, right? The problem at work or the problem with our health or whatever it is, we become laser focused. So when we can zoom out and expand the way that we're actually seeing things, well, then you can go and perform, because now remember why you're doing it. You remember there's other ways in which you can approach different things. Now you have options as well. So yeah, zooming out is definitely the thing.
That's an excellent answer. And it just made me think about I was talking to a bushcraft instructor, and it's that thing of being by the ocean, where you feel really small, because insignificant in a good way, because you realize that it doesn't really matter. So yeah, like you say, when you're in that little situation and you zoom out and see the big picture, it can completely change your perspective. So thank you for sharing that. And I thought, just to finish off, if you want to share with the listeners how they can find you, how they can work with you, I will link to anything in the show notes, but just so they can hear it for themselves from you.
Yeah, of course. So thewellnesstheory.com is where you'll find everything. You'll find links to all of our social media. I think we're in most places, The Wellness Theory. We've got a scorecard where you can actually go and assess and see how is stress showing up in your day-to-day life, in your body, and at that root level that we talked about. So you can do a little assessment and get lots of great tips on obviously how to improve some of the things you might be experiencing. And since we've spoken so much on values, we do have a values worksheet, but you have to email me at charlotte@thewellnesstheory.com to get that, because it's not linked anywhere. It's only because we talked about it. It's something we use with coaching clients, and we can send that over to you if you ask us for it.
And she has her and her husband have a excellent podcast, so you can also check that out. Yeah, so definitely worth a listen. I've listened to some of the episodes and they are absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much for coming on. I've absolutely loved this conversation, and I'm sure everyone listening will as well. And yeah, I hope you have a great rest of the day, and I definitely need to have you get back on again, because I've got loads more questions I want to ask, but I didn't want to make it mega long.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me, Jenny. And I love so much that we're on a very similar mission. And I think the more of us that can kind of come together and keep on beating the drum, we can start to really, really make that progress more and more prevalent. So thank you for the work that you do, and thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Pause to Perform podcast with me, Jenny Devonshire. If you enjoyed this show, I'd really appreciate it if you could rate, review and subscribe. This helps other people find it, and hopefully I can help more people to improve their mental and physical health and optimise their performance.